You have been here before, one step from the finish line, close enough to smell the paint on the tape, and instead of crossing it, you invent a fire to run toward. You conjure a crisis that justifies turning your back on the thing that would have changed your name. You choose the near emergency over the near arrival because winning threatens the story that has explained your struggle for years, and so you burn the bridge to stay familiar. Then call the smoke bad timing, and the heat complications, and the ashes almost. You keep almost becoming the person you are afraid to be, and because almost is honest pain and achievement feels like a mask, you prefer the clean ache of the near miss to the strange quiet that follows a win you do not yet know how to inhabit. Nietzsche warned that the snake which cannot cast its skin has to die, and the sentence lands harder when the skin you will not shed is the narrative in which you are the striver, the underdog, the man forever on the cusp, the one who can say with conviction that if chances were fair, he would already be over the line, a narrative that grants dignity in the trenches and demands that you keep the trenches. There is a psychology to this that is not melodrama, but homeostasis, the body-mind's bias toward the known, the way an identity, once settled, regulates experience like a thermostat. And when the external temperature rises, because success nears, the internal system throws failure at the window to bring the room back to the familiar chill. Marcus Aurelius would have described the motion without romance. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Yet notice how the mind uses that power in reverse. When success threatens to reprice the self, it summons controllable setbacks rather than tolerate uncontrollable praise. It prefers a loss it authored to a win that would require receiving. And so sabotage feels like sovereignty, while victory feels like exposure. That tilt toward controlled damage explains why a man fumbles in ways that preserve agency, missing a deadline by choosing one more revision, injuring himself in the gym the weak discipline finally took, picking a fight before a difficult conversation that would have raised his station. Each error a way to say, "I decided." Each bruise an alibi that preserves the old thermostat setting. Identity is not a slogan you keep on a wall, but an economy of predictions your nervous system makes about who you are allowed to be. And when evidence arrives that would upgrade your credit limit, the old model defends itself with elegant sabotage, not because it hates you, but because it recognizes that gains change obligations, and obligations change the daily choreography that once kept you safe. So the old model prefers the accounting it knows. Become who you are, Nietzsche throws like a hammer across centuries, which sounds like permission until you realize that becoming requires betraying the self that held you together yesterday. That the man who got you here is not the man who can live here. That shedding is not revision, but funeral. And funerals are hard to schedule when applause is nearby and the stage prefers continuity. The mind therefore bargains. Keep the story and sacrifice the outcome. Keep the identity and sacrifice the life it cannot hold. Keep the familiar suffering because its contours fit your hand. Keep the trench because it knows your shape. There is also the arithmetic of prediction error, the brain's constant attempt to forecast the next second and correct the model when it is wrong. And success, by definition, is an error in the model of a man who has built himself around lack. So the correction hurts, not because wins wound, but because the model must change, and model change costs, especially when peers, routines, and private myths have been calibrated to the old version. You may notice how you become clumsy at the threshold, how hands that were sure become uncertain, how the tongue reaches for old jokes that protect you from new rooms, how fatigue increases just as the last tasks are due, how one more check multiplies until the deadline passes and you can sigh the familiar sigh of justified defeat. Marcus Aurelius would bring you back to the small hinge in the door. What stands in the way becomes the way. And you can hear how sabotage turns the way into the wall, then admires the brickwork as proof that you are realistic. Self-concept defends itself with morality plays. I don't want to be that guy, you say at the exact moment. That guy means a man who finishes, who invoices, who asks a price, who allows praise to land without kneeling to disown it. You ascribe arrogance to what is simply closure, because arrogance is a villain you know how to fight, while closure is a mirror that asks if you will allow your worth to be measured in delivery, rather than in endurance. Nietzsche's other hard sentence, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself," carries an invoice you rarely read, because owning yourself after a win includes owning the envy of others, the new expectations in your own chest, the end of excuses you once put between you and your potential. Owning yourself is expensive when the story of you has been written in the ink of almost. Better then to keep the reliable honesty of failure, which never asks you to manage success, which never asks you to lead without the shield of struggle, which never introduces you as the man you promised to become. There is also a social physics you would rather not admit. Wins disturb hierarchies. Tall heads get cut by short crowds. To cross the line is to exit a fellowship of complainers and join a quieter fraternity that is busy, which means fewer late-night consolations, fewer jokes about how the world is rigged, fewer afternoons available for the rituals that were partly friendship and partly anesthesia. The cost is real, so you unconsciously protect the fellowship by staying just close enough to complain. You trade the new obligations of a different room for the old security of a shared grievance. You protect belonging by sacrificing ascension. The story you tell yourself about loyalty acts like honor but wears the face of fear, and because it is fear of loneliness, it feels righteous to avoid it. And because sabotage lets you keep your seat at the old table, sabotage looks like loyalty in the mirror you avoid. Observe the micro-mechanics of the last mile. Across projects and seasons, what repeats is not tragedy but friction. The little delays that make the last 10% cost as much attention as the first 90. The administrative steps that carry no drama, but all the risk of exposure if done badly. The signatures, the shipments, the emails that tie reputation to date and time and deliverable. Many men are romantics until the invoice, and romance, allergic to receipts, will find a crisis to attend rather than a form to submit. And because the crisis is noble and the form is dull, the crisis wins, and so does the old identity. Marcus Aurelius would reduce the grandeur to a verb, just that you do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. And the right thing at the end is almost always plain, dated, and free of poetry, which is why the poet in you manufactures drama to avoid the moment in which your name becomes a line item in a ledger you can no longer narrate into legend. Fear of maintenance hides beneath fear of failure. You can train for a summit. You cannot train for the view. You know the path of preparation by heart. You do not know the daily work of being the man who has already done it, the boredom of stewardship that follows fireworks, the long invisible work of staying rather than arriving. Success demands a calendar that is less cinematic and more repetitive, less heroic and more pastoral, less about storms and more about roofs. So you sabotage to return to the weather you know, because storms allow courage without continuity, and continuity is a different virtue that feels at first like the absence of aliveness. Nietzsche's image of the rope over the abyss, the human as a bridge between animal and overman, describes the exact nausea at this moment, because the bridge shakes more when you have crossed and must keep walking on land that no longer moves beneath your feet. It is easier to jump back onto the rope and call the shaking life. There is guilt, too, quiet and ritualized, a superstition that says, if you win, you will have betrayed the boy who made you promise never to become like the men you envied. A fear that you will be punished for taking what was denied to the tribe that gave you your first language, a loyalty to appetite and anger that taught you how to lift. The psyche proposes a settlement. Remain deserving by remaining deprived. Remain safe by remaining almost. Remain pure by refusing abundance, and you listen because purity is seductive when you have not yet learned that dignity under load is not the only kind of dignity a man can carry. Marcus Aurelius would invite you to look at the thing itself and remove the story. If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your judgment about it. And here, the judgment is that success corrupts, when the thing itself is simply a completed Tuesday. The body participates. Notice how injuries spike in the week before the event, how sleep suddenly becomes erratic, how colds arrive on the exact day of the presentation, how appetite changes when the call is scheduled, how the mind picks fights with people you love 48 hours before a deadline, as if discharging an energy that cannot be tolerated in the body of a man about to be seen. These are not conspiracies. They are protective reflexes, the organism asserting homeostasis by generating situations that justify retreat. The muscles and microbiome playing a quiet duet called "Let Us Go Back to Normal." Nietzsche would not moralize the reflex. He would ask whether you will keep calling it fate when it is you, whether you will defend your old self like a beloved tyrant, whether you will keep telling the story in which your authenticity relies on a wound that never closes. Self-sabotage is not always loud. Often it is the choice to multiply options at the exact hour focus is required. The decision to keep doors open as a way to avoid choosing the door that leads to a narrower life with larger stakes. The preference for rehearsals that can be improved over a performance that can only be judged. The addiction to upgrades that give the illusion of progress while postponing the moment the thing must stand. Options feel like power until they become a refuge from responsibility. Marcus Aurelius would clean the table and ask what is necessary, then ask again, then ask whether the answer is joined to action, and in that examination you can feel how the mind moves toward adding when subtracting would make you cross the line. Too many tools, too many drafts, too many contingencies, too many people asked, not enough people told. The last mile is narrow, and sabotage widens it until you can turn around. There is the Zygarnik itch, the mind's tendency to keep unfinished tasks more vivid than finished ones, which explains why almost done can feel more alive than done, why men addicted to urgency feel most themselves at 90%, why finishing briefly quiets the orchestra you have learned to conduct, and why you rush to start something new as soon as the quiet becomes audible. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, Nietzsche wrote, and when the why has been to prove I am trying, the how you will bear is perpetual almostness. When the why becomes to be the man who delivers, the how changes temperature and texture, and your body, trained on drama, will call it numbness until it learns that peace is not the absence of worth. Observe how you protect thresholds with righteous detours. A call from a friend who needs you the hour you must write the last paragraph. An equipment failure that could have been prevented by checking it yesterday. A sudden enthusiasm for optimizing the part of the system that is already strong, rather than facing the weak link that will break under weight. Sabotage loves noble errands because they let you accrue self-respect, while you avoid the one act that would close the loop. Marcus Aurelius would raise the plain question you avoid. Is this necessary? And if you answer honestly, you will notice how often success is postponed by necessary feeling tasks that are really protection rituals, little sacrifices to a God whose temple is your old story. Imposter feelings are often misread as humility. You say you feel fake when you win, which sounds like conscience, but is often your nervous system expressing unfamiliarity with honor. Your mouth borrowing the language of ethics to describe a biological surprise. The organism learned to equate elevated arousal with threat, so the arousal of being seen after a win gets labeled wrong, and the label then justifies stepping away from situations that would acclimate you to the new altitude. Nietzsche, who knew about altitudes, reminds you that the higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. And you might add quietly that the smaller you appear to yourself at first as well, not because you have shrunk, but because your eye has not yet learned the scale of a life at height. Consider the invisible contracts you keep with the men around you. Some of those contracts were signed with a joke, others with a glance after a loss, others in a garage full of parts and plans and the hum of a borrowed space heater. The contract sometimes reads, "We will suffer together and call it truth." To win is to bring a new clause to the table, a clause that says, "We can also steward." If stewardship feels like betrayal, sabotage will restore the old terms. You will remain a member in good standing of a brotherhood that prefers the moral certainty of effort to the moral ambiguity of outcome. Marcus Aurelius would not scold the brotherhood. He would ask whether the contract is aligned with nature, meaning reality, meaning whether men are made to loop or to move. And in that question, you will hear whether your loyalty serves life or merely serves a story. Sabotage often masquerades as standards. You raise the bar at the end, add a flourish, require a level of polish that no one asked for. Tell yourself that excellence demands it, and because excellence is a word that buys silence in every room, you spend it, and the deadline passes like a clock with its hands removed. Nietzsche would warn that perfection is sometimes an instrument of resentment. The part of you that fears being measured invents a standard no one can meet, including you, and then feels superior to men who dared to ship. Meanwhile, the man who ships learns at a speed unavailable to the man who shades himself with ideals. The wound here is not that you lost to a weaker man. It is that you protected yourself from being corrected by reality and called it taste. There is an entire ecology of avoidance built from kindness. You do not submit the work because someone else's schedule is tight. You postpone the launch because a friend is having a rough week and you want to be present. You delay the ask because you do not want to pressure the man across the table, and then you praise yourself for being patient, and the calendar learns that your compassion toward others is cruelty toward your future. Marcus Aurelius, who softened no blows for himself, would call the thing what it is, then move his hand to the next action, and in that simplicity, there is a courage you can borrow without learning to be hard. You can be gentle toward men and strict toward time without betraying either. You may have noticed that your arguments increase right before finish lines. The mind that cannot tolerate praise without a shield will manufacture conflict to justify the shield, and then you will tell yourself that you cannot finish a work of peace while at war, which is true, and therefore you get to remain true and unfinished. Nietzsche would ask what part of you needed the fight, whether a small humiliation is more comfortable than a large affirmation, whether the man in you that does not know how to receive prefers a bruise you understand to a laurel that makes you feel like a traitor to the self that survived without it. The future self complicates the room. Wins change his job description. He must now choose bigger problems, say no to better offers, carry other men, perform in rooms that cannot be impressed by effort. He often does not want the job, The present self senses the refusal and does him the favor of sabotaging now, so tomorrow can avoid being drafted, which is how you remain loyal to the least ambitious version of who you are and call it prudence. Marcus Aurelius would ask whether prudence here is fear with good manners, whether you are protecting your soul or protecting your calendar from being rewritten by a better man than the current you, and the discomfort in your stomach will answer before your mouth does. There is an upper limit feeling, the ceiling of deservedness calibrated to the income of attention and affection you learned to tolerate in childhood, and when life offers a deposit above that ceiling, you bounce it. You create a cost that returns your balance to a level that feels like you. You tell yourself that fate is fair because the house always wins, and the house is named My History. Nietzsche's insistence on self-overcoming is not poetry here. It is arithmetic, because the ceiling does not move until the man moves, and the man does not move until he allows the shame of surpassing his past to land without confessing a crime he did not commit, the crime of betraying the boy who needed less, because less was all there was. Notice how you narrate the almost with a proud jaw and narrate the win with a soft apology, how you announce defeats like credentials and whisper victories as if someone might overhear and file charges, how you maintain a reputation for grit by never letting anyone see you comfortable in success, which ensures that comfort never arrives because it is not allowed to be seen, and things that cannot be seen in your life tend not to exist for long. Marcus Aurelius would say, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." And in this terrain, being one includes learning to be seen finishing without flinching, not as a performance, but as an absence of performance. The absence of crisis. The quiet crossing of a line meant to be crossed. Some men sabotage because they fear theft more than they fear loss, meaning that losing to chaos they created feels better than having a win taken. So they preempt the theft by breaking the thing, and now no one can steal what is already ruined, and the ruined thing becomes a talisman against envy and a certificate of control, and the boy in them who has watched hands take keeps the ritual because it works, and the man pays for it with his future. Nietzsche's amor fati is medicine in this specific sickness, the love of one's fate not as a passive acceptance, but as a refusal to keep staging tragedies because tragedies are safe from thieves, a refusal to wreck the house as a way to protect it from fire. You can also see how exhaustion changes your standard of evidence. Near the finish, fatigue makes your threshold for good enough wobble, then sink, and when it sinks, you accept crumbs from yourself that you would not accept in the middle of the project, which teaches you, quietly and efficiently, that the last mile is where your integrity thins, and the next time you arrive here, your muscles remember, and the slide begins earlier, and soon you are the man who sprints for 9 miles and staggers the last one, then explains the pattern with philosophy. Marcus Aurelius would have none of these explanations, and that is why men still read him, not for cleverness but for clarity, because he does not argue with weather. He asks whether you did the thing you told yourself you would do, and the weather adjusts. It is tempting to reframe sabotage as romance, to call yourself a tragic figure who resists the vulgarity of completion, to quote artists as if their delays were all depth and none defense, to take pride in the purity of unfinished excellence that will not be polluted by the public. And while sometimes that sentence is true, often it is a way to keep your life in a state where no one can weigh it. Nietzsche understood this vanity and stabbed it with aphorisms because aphorisms move faster than excuses, and Marcus understood the fatigue of men who talk well and finish seldom, because he was surrounded by senators who performed gravitas until it was time to act and then performed reasons. The most precise lens, if you are willing, is to treat sabotage as a method of regulating intensity, a way to turn down the voltage when the light gets too bright, a way to darken the room to the level where you feel like yourself, a way to choose a life that is intense but not decisive, busy but not binding, full of effort but empty of signatures, and then ask whether the intensity you love is the same as the intimacy with reality you claim to want. Nietzsche would ask whether the aesthetic you prefer is a stall, and Marcus would ask whether the beauty of your preparation is the last disguise of your fear of being measured. If you look back without ornament, you will see that your losses were rarely purely imposed, that the tide did not always take you, that often you opened the floodgates a little, and then a lot. That often you negotiated with the exact part of yourself you later accused, that often you chose a pain you could narrate over a change you would have to live. This is not condemnation. It is inventory. And inventory is what a man does when he is tired of telling stories about what might have been and is ready to do the uninteresting arithmetic of what is. Marcus Aurelius would not applaud you for the inventory. He would move his eyes to the day. Nietzsche would not console you for the inventory. He would tell you to burn the skin that does not fit, and if you cannot burn it, at least stop tanning it. The red line through all of this is simple to say and hard to live. Winning threatens a story that once saved you. You saved yourself by becoming a certain kind of man, and success would retire that man, and retirement feels like betrayal. So you arrange for him to remain necessary by failing at the exact moment his obsolescence would be proved. Then you comfort him with a crisis, instead of letting him die with honors. A better funeral is possible. It is quiet. It is unsentimental. It is conducted by a man who does not call his future theft. It ends with a new job description, printed on the inside of your skull, where narratives go when they are no longer allowed to command the room. At that point, the finish line becomes uninteresting in the best way. It is a line you cross because the line exists, because your hand moved when it was time, because the thermostat in you is set to a different temperature, because the story you live now is not the story you needed then, because Nietzsche's demand to become who you are is not a romance, but a refusal to be an actor assigned to the same role forever, because Marcus's insistence that you have power over your mind is not a slogan, but a reminder that the old scripts are handwritten and can therefore be thrown away. And if you need one last sentence that does not flatter you, use his coldest one. Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. In the last mile, the right thing is often the dullest thing. That is why it is right. That is why it is hard. That is why a man is built for it.